Hi everyone, welcome back to my top 500 games, and we are continuing on from number 406, and that is Sega Superstars. I've already explained a couple of times about what the iToy was, so I'm not going to bother explaining it again. This was the Sega version of the iToy where it used Sega mascots and Sega style games. There's only a few specifically that I remember playing quite a lot. I remember there was the Samba de Amigo one, which was kind of like the whole rhythm one. It was kind of similar to iToy Groove. But there was also a few others, including there was a Sonic one where you ran straight down a tunnel and you had to tilt yourself to turn Sonic. And you also had to collect rings, and it was down this long tunnel. There was also the game whereby you controlled the monkey ball from the monkey, and you had to tilt left and right in order to control the tilt of the level, and that was very hard because you had to keep your arms held out. It was very difficult. But the other one that I remember was the Puyo Puyo themed game whereby you had to sort of use your arms to guide the different blobs into the different tubes or whatever they were, the different sides of the levels. This game was a bit more advanced than the previous iToy games. I think they got a bit more understanding of the technology. For example, there were some games where you had to configure the different sides, one at each side. So basically you configured one side and then you configured another side, or calibrated rather, so that rather than just being able to detect movement, it would be able to detect a difference in something being there and something not being there, which was quite interesting. I also remember that if you did that but you messed it up, the beans, the little Puyo Pop things, they just stay on the screen, they shake around and vibrate because they didn't know what to do. Number 405 is Pilotwings 64. Now, I never had a Nintendo 64, so any games that I talk about that were on the N64, I either was able to play at a later date through some other means, or I played it somewhere else, and that was the case here with Pilotwings 64, because I used to go to a childcare centre many years ago. Obviously, I'm not a child anymore, but I used to go to a childcare centre between the ages of around 9 and 13, I think it was, and at some point, at one of the early stages of going there, they had an N64. So I actually got to play a few N64 games when I was there, and one of those games was Pilotwings 64. I was still at that stage where I didn't understand how the controller worked. It seemed really strange, and it still seems really strange to me, the controller. But I do remember you controlled these different characters, and you had to guide them through this level, on this island, and you had to make them land on a particular spot and fly through hoops and all that sort of stuff. And I remember that the game stood out to me sort of graphically, which sounds really strange because this was well beyond the point where I was amazed by 3D graphics. Maybe it was just the size or the scope of the levels, or maybe, I'm not sure, but something about that stood out to me at the time. Number 404 is Rugrats Search for Reptar, which was a game on the PS1 that I had. Now, you can look back at this game now and you can say it's a rubbish game, and I can completely understand. It's basically, I don't want to call it a platform game. It's obviously a game for very young children, whereby you've got these challenges that are all very, very easy, and the challenges are all based on Rugrats episode. So there's one episode whereby you're playing hide and seek, and the other babies are hiding just by in the corner, just putting their hands over their face. It's that type of level that we're talking about here. But this was at a time whereby I got PS1 games, just copied PS1 games, and I just played whatever I got at the time. So I wasn't really bothered, I just played whatever it was that I had. But I'm not saying that this was all purely nostalgia based, because the one thing that I think really pushed this game a lot higher up, that made it a lot, I'm not going to say harder or anything like that, but that made it a lot more interesting at the time, was that there was a mini golf game, and we really had a lot of fun with that. It was me and my brother, and there was some kids that my mum used to childmind. we had a lot of fun with that. Played a lot of the Crazy Golf on the Rugrats. I remember there was one level in particular on the Crazy Golf whereby you had to go, it was like a pyramid I think, and you had to go in like a square spiral sort of shape. It was quite strange, but that was what we did most of the time on this game. I also remember there was a level that I thought was quite creepy, which is where everything was upside down and you had to collect balloons or something like that. And just the idea of walking along the ceiling I found quite unsettling. Number 403 is Super Rubber Dub. This is a PS3 game, and it's one of those early PS3 games. And this is a game whereby this actually may have been my first downloaded PS3 game. In fact, I think it probably was. But the way that this game works is that you had this sort of bathtub type thing. It was like a tray with water in it, and you got these rubber ducks. And you had to tilt the controller to guide them around and make sure that they didn't fall off and get them all to the end. And you could flick the controller to make them jump as well, which is quite interesting. But I think this demo, not this demo, I think this game spawned from the demo, like the tech demo that they used during one of the previous E3s to show off the PS3's graphical capabilities, where they had that bathtub and all the rubber ducks just dropped in, and they were saying all these rubber ducks act individually. That's how much processing power the PS3 has. I think there's a mix of that and also the mix of trying to show off the 6-axis controller, because that was a big thing at the time where you could tilt the controller. But yeah, the idea was you had to go through the levels and you could try to get as big a score as you possibly could. And this was, I believe, my first downloaded PS3 game at the time. Well, my first downloaded PS3 game, period. Number 402 is Penny Arcade Adventures on the Rain-Slick Precipice of Darkness Episode 1. That's a long title, but this is a game that I got. It's an RPG, and I did play through it quite a bit, not too much, but there was the one thing that I found quite off-putting about this game was that at least it felt like at the time that there was too much you had to pay attention to during battle. So, for example, you had to scroll between the characters, and you also had to scroll between their different attacks. And whilst doing that, you also had to look at the screen where the enemies were, and they'd come up and attack you, and you had to press the button to sort of like block their attack. So I think the game gave you a bit too many things to look at once, and it moved along a bit too fast, whereby it was too hard to really like think of the strategy to really be able to go through the game effectively, maybe. And I think this is, and I don't want to go off onto a tangent here, but I do think that this is a good example of what I call the interactivity problem when it comes to these types of RPGs, where there's a certain brand of person out there who, for some reason, believes that turn-based RPGs aren't interactive. You just tell your characters what to do, you're not doing anything. And so we get these added features where it's like, press a button when the enemy hits you to dodge out of the way. And this is sort of seen as interactive by some people for some reason. And so that gets used to the point where it doesn't really add anything interesting to the game or anything like that. But I've really felt that was a letdown for this game. Number 401 is V-Rally, the PlayStation version. And I think this was like a variation of Sega Rally. What I do remember though, it was one of those racing games where it told you the corners that were coming up and to what degree. So like you'd be driving down and there would be an announcer that says, medium right, easy left, easy right. And you'd have to go the way that it says. It's very, very straightforward in that regards. I also remember that there was some races whereby it didn't have that lap feature. It didn't, you know, the basic racing game feature whereby you start at the beginning and you go around and you do a lap, and then you start at the beginning and you go around and do another one again. I seem to remember there were some levels whereby that wasn't the case. You just had a starting point and a finishing point, and you just had to go from the start to the end. And I think there was a New Zealand level that did that. I seem to have this memory of there being quite a lot of levels, which probably wasn't, but that's just part of my memory. I also remember that one of the kids that my mum childminded at the time, called Nick. I actually played against him on this endless mode, and the way that that worked was that he would sort of be racing against someone, but it wouldn't end, so it would just keep a track of how many laps you've done. And I remember there was one time where I had overlapped him like 10 times or whatever, and then I had left to come downstairs for some reason, and then he was still playing, and then when he came down, he said he'd overlapped me, and then when we went back up, I was still like 6 laps ahead of him or something like that. But yeah, fond memories. I seem to remember it being a rather colourful game for some reason. Again, don't know why that's particularly like is cemented. Maybe because there was other games around this time, racing games that weren't as colourful. But I seem to have that memory in my mind that, yep, this is a colourful game. Strange how that works, isn't it? Okay, so that's the first 100 down. We are 20% of the way through this list, and we are not stopping now because we are going to continue with number 400, which is Splosion Man. This is a game that I got on the Xbox Live Arcade at some point. It's basically a 2D platformer, apart from the theme is that you explode rather than jumping. So you run along, press the jump button, and what happens is it causes an explosion below you, so you fly up. It's jumping, but they just called it exploding for the theme, I guess. And I do remember that from what I played, it quite a lot consisted of you sort of finding ways of going from point A to point B with a limited amount of explosions, because you only have so many explosions until you hit the floor. So you could like double jump or triple jump or whatever, but you could also sort of bounce off walls, and there were things that you could find that would enhance the size of your explosion, the effectiveness of it, that would allow you to jump higher. So sometimes you'd have like these little obstacle courses where you had to like jump to the side, then jump back up, so that you could line up with this thing that would expand your explosion higher up, and all that sort of stuff. Number 399 is Ninja Gaiden. Is that how you pronounce it? Gaiden? I think that's how it's believed that you pronounce it. Yeah, okay. Ninja Gaiden, whatever. But basically, it's an original Nintendo game, which I didn't have an original Nintendo, but I actually played this on my brother's Wii because he had it on Virtual Console, and I actually had quite a bit of fun with it. I didn't get too far because I know I've seen all the reviews, I've seen everything, where it gets ridiculously hard later on, whereby enemies, you'll kill an enemy, and then if you try to get out of the way, they'll instantly respawn, and all that lot of stuff. But I only really played the first few levels, but I had fun playing the first few levels. I particularly liked the jumping off the wall and just timing the attacks and stuff. I think there's a particular type of thing that I really like when it comes to these like old style platform games, where it comes to the element of accuracy, like timing and accuracy, as opposed to like button combinations and that sort of stuff. I'm sure I'll talk about that more when I get to later points on this list. Next game is number 398, which is Color World. I'm spelling it without the U because I'm guessing that's how the original game would have been spelled, but I would never otherwise spell colour without a U, unless it was like Game Boy Color or something, like a brand name. But whatever. This was one of those flash games that I had played online, like a browser-based flash game. You know, like the ones that you find on Congregate and all that sort of stuff. With this one, you had to sort of get things to be a certain colour, and the way that you got things to be a certain colour was you had to hit things of that colour that would sort of allow you to change things into a different colour, and sometimes you just have to hit things of a colour against things of another colour to change the colour. That's the basic premise of the idea. Really not much to talk about, so I could just move on to the next game. Number 397 is Tekken Dark Resurrection. This is a game that I borrowed from my friend Josh, who had this game on PSP. I borrowed it from him on the PSP, and it was just a basic Tekken game, really. I'm not too familiar with like how Tekken has changed much. like in the later games, even though I have played some of them. But one thing I do remember was that you start with all the characters unlocked, which I don't like. I don't like not having things to unlock. But what you can do is you can complete the game with characters and you can sort of unlock their endings, and you get money by doing these fights based on your performance, and you can spend this money to buy like costumes and things, and you can also use them to buy endings, like the characters' endings. But I remember thinking to myself, what's the point of buying a character's ending when I can just complete it as that character and earn money in the meantime? My guess is sort of like just in case someone really hates using a particular character or something, I don't know. But I'm not very good at fighting games, and I completed it with all the characters, so I don't really understand why that would be the case. Number 396 is Battle Tanks, and this is another PS3 download game, and it's sort of like one of those arena arcade games where you control a tank and your basic aim is to go around and blow up the other tanks, the other enemy opponents' tanks. I don't know why I said enemy opponents. Enemy and opponent is basically the same thing in this context, or whatever. But yeah, you've got these different levels and you just have to drive around, or whatever it is you do in tanks, go around and shoot your enemy and be the last one standing, or whatever, just win the round. That's the aim of this game. The aim of this game is to win. There you go. Number 395 is Pac-Man. Everyone knows what Pac-Man is. You control Pac-Man, you have to go around the level, eating these dots, avoiding the ghosts. Each one has their own AI pattern, and you pick up the big super Pac pellet, as I think it's called. I remember they were called that in the cartoon, so that's what I called them. And then that turns all the ghosts blue, so you can go around and kill all the enemies. And once you complete the level, you go to the next level, and everything's a bit faster. Old style arcade game. Everyone knows what Pac-Man is. All TV shows reference it at some point. It's one of those types of games, so I shouldn't really need to mention anything about it. But I will talk about something nostalgia-wise for me, because when I was, I don't know how old I would have been. I think I would have been about 15 years old. At school, we had to do work experience, and the place that I went to, it was sort of like this reception job. Something to do with the local council, just like at the front room at the reception. And I had to do things like fix spelling errors on letters and all that. And I remember having to like open letters and stuff. And this, I'm not talking about Pac-Man, I noticed, but the part of the story is that the computer that they had there had Pac-Man on it. So every so often they'd just say, "Oh, play Pac-Man." So when I think of Pac-Man, I think of working in this little reception, and on the last day, my supervisor wasn't there, so the person who was supervising me at the time just said, "Play Pac-Man." So I spent all of the day from whatever time. It was like a 9 to 5 thing, I think, from like 9 to 5, playing Pac-Man. So that's what Pac-Man reminds me of. But before I end this episode, I'm going to quickly move on, because at number 394, we have, and I suppose you could say this is a bit of a clump in a way, but I would specifically want to talk about this game separately. And it sounds very, very strange, because number 394 is a game called, and you're going to laugh at this, Mouthman. This was a game on the Amiga that I had before I knew Pac-Man existed, and if I showed you footage of this game, you're just going to say, "It's Pac-Man, it's just Pac-Man, what is this you're showing me here? It's Pac-Man." And it is basically Pac-Man. But the reason I'm counting it as a different entry, as opposed to just, the same, is that what Mouthman had that Pac-Man didn't was that it had new levels. You could, once you finished the first level, you actually went to a different level, and the new levels had things arranged differently. And I remember, like, the third level, it was green, and it was like divided into 2 segments, and the levels got these really strange patterns, and I found that very interesting. I really liked seeing how far I could go to see if I could discover a new level, which, of course, because I wasn't aware of Pac-Man, like proper Pac-Man at the time, I could never really say, "Oh, this is just Pac-Man." To me, it was just Mouthman, and then it was eventually later introduced to me as Pac-Man. Now, this game is probably, I imagine, because it's like a rip-off, I imagine there's not going to be the same level of competence with the AI. They're not going to have that same level of layers of the different ghosts and all that. But this is just of my experience and what I've played, and I would just be speculating at that point. But yeah, I'm going to end this here. So thank you for watching, everyone, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.